landmark decision, Japan has been told it must stop all whaling in the Antarctic. The decision was made in the International Court of Justice after Australia brought the legal challenge against Japan. It was the first time any country had used an international court to try to stop whaling. The court, which sits in The Hague, has ruled Japan should stop its whaling program with immediate effect and cease granting new permits for the killing, taking and treating of whales. The court president, Peter Tomka, said the scientific output of the program, known as JAPA 2, appears limited.
Taken as a whole, the court considers that JAPA 2 involves activities that can broadly be characterized as scientific research, but that the evidence does not establish that the program's design and implementation are reasonable in relation to achieving its stated objectives.
The spokesperson for Japan's delegation in The Hague, Nori Shikata, says they're disappointed by the court's decision but will abide by the ruling.
During the days and weeks to come back in Japan, we will consider our future course of action. But one thing which is clear is that we are saying that we are going to abide by the decision of the court.
Phil Peterson is the bosun on board the Bob Barker ship, which is owned by the Sea Shepherd organisation, and is currently docked in Wellington.
We were related. Actually, I was watching it live, and at one point I just was sitting there. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I didn't really think that it was going to go that way, but it was pretty overwhelming to see the vote 12-4 on the 7 points, and 13-3 on one of the other points. It was quite impressive to see that justice has been served, and it's a big win for the whales, obviously.
Well, we'll go to The Hague now. The BBC's Anna Holligan was in the International Court of Justice, and she's with us now. Anna, just take us through. This sounds like a very comprehensive decision from the court.
Absolutely, and you're right to call it a landmark case. And it took the judges here in The Hague an hour and a half to read through this judgment. It was so substantial and it was groundbreaking because it's the first time this court has been asked to make a ruling on a case like this. And as you heard there from the activists, they've described this as a kind of make or break test case for whaling. So basically, the Japanese had argued that they were involved in a program of scientific research, this JARPA 2 program. The Australians, with New Zealand intervening, had accused Japan of using science as a kind of disguise for what was actually commercial whaling. So because they wanted to use the whale meat for dinners in Tokyo, it's less popular than it used to be, but it's still served there, and many feel it's part of the Japanese tradition. Now, the judgment took a while to get to, but essentially, to break it down to its most crucial elements, it came down to this. The judges ruled that because since 2005, 3,600 minke whales have been killed, and only a limited amount of scientific research has come from that, so it couldn't be proved, as far as the judges were concerned, that this was indeed scientific research.
Now, this is a 70-page finding, lots of fine print. Is there any room there for the Japanese to get out of it in any way at all?
Very good question. And you heard there actually from Nori Shikata, who was representing the Japanese delegation here. And he was actually here with me earlier. And I asked him this question maybe 5 or 6 times, and it was very difficult to get an answer as to whether this was the end of whaling altogether in the Southern Ocean. He was basically saying, we need to look at this judgment. We need to work out what the limitations are. He made it very clear that Japan is prepared to act within the international law, to stick to the International Whaling Convention, but they want to look at the small print, and they want to work out whether there is another way of continuing with the practice, but within the realms of scientific research. So they don't want to break the rules, but they want to see if they can find a way to work within them to keep Tokyo happy and also the rest of the world, although the activists will still be keeping an eye on things down there.
Anna, thank you very much for that. That's the BBC's Anna Holligan at The Hague. Well, listening to all this has been the Foreign Affairs Minister, Murray McCully. Good morning, Mr. McCully.
Good morning.
So what do you make of it? Is it a landmark, absolutely 100% decision that everyone would have wanted in terms of protecting the whales in the Southern Ocean?
Yes, it is. It's absolutely the outer edge of what I think any of us dared hope for. Of course, you need to remind yourself that this is a court case that many people were very apprehensive about because eminent lawyers like Sir Geoffrey Palmer have argued that you could end up in taking such a case simply confirming Japan's right to whale under these circumstances. Now, this judgment, as you've had described to you, is very firm and very clear, but it still does leave Japan with a decision to make after they've digested this, which is to look at whether they try and devise a new program that is scientifically based, that they could embark upon whaling in the Southern Ocean again. And our task is to make sure that we carry out a diplomatic conversation that dissuades them from embarking on that course.
So that door is still open?
Yeah, it's the specific program that they've got in operation at the moment called JAPA 2 that the court has ruled is outside the IWC rules, and it's told them that they've got to stop whaling under that program. They could still try and put together a new program that tried to meet some of the tests that the court's outlined. We hope that won't happen, and in the short term I'm sure it won't, because this is going to take a bit of working through.
And of course Japan also conducts other whaling in the northern Pacific. I mean, could they redirect resources there?
Well, they could, but of course that's going to be an interesting question now, faced with the decision the court's made in The Hague overnight. It's quite likely that someone's going to look at the other whaling programs that Japan's embarked upon on the so-called scientific heading and try and enforce the same judgment in relation to those programs.
Is this really Australia's victory, not New Zealand's?
Oh, look, I think New Zealand can take significant credit from this. The legal case that New Zealand spelt out as intervener in the court is essentially the logic that the court's outlined in its judgment last night. So I think the lawyers who serve the New Zealand government's interests here have absolutely picked the right lines to run with the court, and have effectively had their position confirmed. I think that there's a big victory for the Australian case here, and we should. I sent Julie Bishop a text message last night to congratulate her and the government on achieving it. But that doesn't mean this thing's over yet. Japan has been involved in this practice for some time. We hope that we can avoid an outcome which sees them look at whaling in the Southern Oceans under a different program, and that's where the diplomacy is going to be important over the coming weeks.
Would you say that the Sea Shepherd organisation is due a vote of thanks at all?
No, I wouldn't. In many ways, I've said before that this is a program that is carried out today largely for reasons of pride on Japan's part, rather than because they've got a use for the whale meat or any useful scientific outcomes. And one of the problems has been that the protest activity down there has rather made Japan dig its heels in. So while I'm sure that some of the Sea Shepherd people will claim credit for it, in fact, my own perspective has been that Japan needs a bit of space here to work its way out of what is a practice that's got no future.
The Foreign Affairs Minister, Murray McCully, thank you.
A local kaumatua will bless the site this morning on Auckland's Totara Vale Reserve, where the remains of Auckland woman Sissy Chen were discovered last week. Mrs. Chen, a 44-year-old accountant, went missing from her home on Guy Fawkes night in 2012. Her remains were found in a drain at the Auckland Reserve, and police have since found other parts of her skeleton in the area. The officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Bruce Scott, joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Geoff.
Anything happened overnight? Any developments?
Nothing much overnight, but we're certainly pleased that Sissy has been identified and will be able to return her remains to her family in China.
At this point, are you able to talk about the cause of death?
No, I can't talk about the cause of death at the moment, Geoff. That's operationally we need to keep that to ourselves just at the moment.
Do you have any particular fresh leads at the moment?
We've got a number of inquiries that we're making. We've got people to talk to, people that we've previously talked to. Now that we've discovered where Sissy's body was placed, we need to re-interview some people and get more information.
was placed, you're confident that she was dead when her body was placed in the drain?
Yes, we are confident that she was placed there.
You're re-interviewing people from the earlier investigation, you said?
Yes, we are, yep.
Is her partner still in the country?
Yes, he is.
What's been his reaction?
He's keen to see the inquiry completed.
Is he a suspect?
I can't talk about who may or may not be suspects, Geoff, unfortunately.
Can you tell me whether it was an area where Sissy Chen, would she have known the area? Would she have walked around there?
She and her partner both knew the area because they had lived nearby and had walked in that vicinity. We understand now from friends.
So is this an area that you were previously searching, you suspected she might be?
No, we hadn't searched this area. We searched a lot of ponds and areas on the North Shore using a police dive squad and other specialist teams. But this, with the information that we had at the time, this wasn't one of those places that we searched.
Now, is there any way the public can help you in this investigation?
Well, we're doing an area canvass around the Cote Reserve, and we're hoping that anybody that may have seen anything suspicious, especially on the 5th of November 2012, will be able to come forward and talk to us.
Indeed, let's hope they can. Thank you for joining us this morning, Detective Inspector Bruce Scott.
Now, this morning we are bringing you some highlights of Geoff's career at Radio New Zealand. He's been the voice of Morning Report since 1976. He's been at the helm of Morning Report for many of the major news stories over the past 4 decades. And, for example, for many listeners, the first they knew of the 9/11 attacks in the United States in 2001 was when they turned on Morning Report. We abandoned all the usual programming and went to air from 5 a.m. Here's how Geoff brought the news of the attacks to listeners.
The worst terrorist attacks on the United States mainland in modern history have struck at the heart of New York and Washington and plunged the country into chaos and panic. The United States. There have been unprecedented attacks with 4 planes hijacked and 3 of them deliberately crashed into New York's World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Loss of life is expected to be catastrophic from the subsequent collapse of the 2 towers of the center where many thousands of people work. There are believed to be casualties at the Pentagon as well, the headquarters of the American military, where the building is on fire. All major government buildings...
Massive rescue effort that's going on right now. We're trying to evacuate thousands and thousands of people. We have as many of our police and fire personnel as we have.
Well, our reporter Ray Lamb was in New York.
We'll leave the CNN coverage for a moment there because our health correspondent Ray Lamb is in the United States on a scholarship at the moment, and Ray joins us now. Ray, I understand you're on the streets of Manhattan.
I am, Geoff. I was sitting at a meeting when just after 9 the word came through that the World Trade Center, one of the buildings had been hit by a plane. The meeting broke up, and obviously we hit the TV set. I'm now outside. I've headed downtown, and it's just the most amazing scenes. It's just, they're talking about it being the day America stood still, and that's what it feels like.
And we crossed back and forth to the international coverage all morning, and we went to another New Zealand voice, our ambassador to the United Nations, Don Mackay. Are you able to say that all the New Zealanders who, for instance, work with you at the United Nations are safe at this point?
Yes, good morning, Geoff. Yes, all of the New Zealanders who work in the mission, and indeed those who work at the New Zealand consulate and their families are safe. But at this stage, we're not able to go much further than that.
So, Geoff, of all the major events you've covered, and there have been many, that must have been a particularly extraordinary morning.
It certainly was. I mean, the horror of it just sort of came through to us as the morning went on. You do get caught up in the excitement of coverage of something like that, as you know, and the adrenaline rush sort of pushes you along to do things and get more information there. But at the same time, you started to realise just what this meant, and we took it in, we being Sean, who was working with me then, took it in turns to be in the studio, as it were, hosting it, and then in the other studio recording people to bring them back and play them into the programme, describing what was going on. And then Kim came and joined us after just about 8:30, I think, and we rotated again. And that was really the first moment that we had to stop and just pause. You walked out of the studio and thought, blimey, what have I been involved in? And you do come down quite hard. And it was exciting. It was horrible. Probably the most important story I'll ever be involved with.
And there has been, on the local scene in more recent times, another horrible story that you and I have both covered. That was when the devastating 6.3 magnitude quake hit Christchurch. And, of course, people then did turn to Radio New Zealand for news.
Today is, I guess, a kind of a warning message for those Kiwis that are living in Libya to kind of avoid these more dangerous areas, and calling for the regime to show constraint. Oh, there's a big earthquake. Oh, shit.
Are you still there? Are you still there? Are you still there? I lost you. Are you still there? I lost you.
Shit.
I've lost you.
Shit.
I've lost you.
I'm so sorry, Baha. I'm going to have to go. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
That was our reporter Bridget Mills reporting conducting an interview as the earthquake struck in Christchurch. The morning after the quake, when survivors were still being found, Geoff introduced our coverage like this.
And there's only one story today on the programme, the aftermath of the earthquake in Christchurch. We'll be talking to the rescue authorities, to the Prime Minister, the police and the people of a city which is still, of course, trying to recover from the earlier earthquake last September. It's a scene of devastation down there. We'll bring the information about rescues and the death toll, sadly, as the programme continues.
One of the key interviews that morning was with the police commander who'd been working all night to rescue people.
Superintendent Russell Gibson was the police night shift commander in Christchurch last night. This is what he told us an hour ago.
There is incredible carnage right throughout the CBD. It's completely cordoned off with the army and police staff. We're currently virtually going door to door through those buildings, crying out to see if we can hear people who are trapped in those buildings. But most of our attention has been on two buildings, which is the Canterbury TV building and also the PGG building in Cambridge Terrace.
You got 3 people out of the Canterbury TV building, I understand, and 8 out of the other one?
No, we've got significantly more out of both of them, to be honest. We've been pulling 20 or 30 people out of those buildings right throughout the night.
And when I was in Christchurch, I was taken into the red zone to the site of the collapsed CTV building, and it was a very sobering experience. And this is the CTV building that we're coming up to, and this is as close as we're going to get to it. There are a barrier across the road, and we're stopping here, and you can see the rescue workers, the Caterpillar excavators on the building. They're wearing, some of them are in light blue, maybe the Japanese crew we've been hearing about, and others I can see the yellow and orange jackets. They seem to be about, 3 metres above ground level where they are at the moment. Some of them in masks, and there's one very big crane here. I imagine they swing that over and load what they can on a bit at a time and then swing it away.
And Geoff was back in Christchurch for the memorial service for the people who died in the quake. Now, Geoff's anchored many state funerals and memorials. This was one of the tougher ones.
A few moments ago, we saw the sight of the urban rescue teams, all in their highly coloured dungarees and their fluorescent vests marching in. And as they marched in, the crowd stood and cheered. I mean, it was a very emotional moment for all the people here. It certainly was. You can hear it in my voice, can't you?
Certainly can, indeed. Well, we were both covering the Christchurch and both went down and did trips there to do outside broadcasts from the city over a period of many months and, in fact, years. This has been an event which has just carried on for all that time, Geoff. It still resonates today.
Well, indeed. I mean, as you remember, our broadcasting position was in front of the Christchurch Arts Centre, underneath all that glass, building there. And I remember, indeed, sitting there talking to Jerry Brownlee one morning as a quake came, and we could hear this sort of rattling of the glass behind us and the doors, but the building was designed to be earthquake-proof, and it worked while we were there, thank goodness. But one of the things I've always found most difficult was that with a disaster like that, you have to do those awful how do you feel stories. You know, you have to interview the survivors and get them to tell you what it's like. And it's gut-wrenching, isn't it?
It is. It takes something out of you, but as you say, it's your job. Got to do it.
An international report says we're unprepared for the increase in floods, droughts and wildfires expected as a result of climate change. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change found New Zealand has a significant adaptation deficit, and that any work done to prepare have been conceptual and not about implementation. The President of Local Government New Zealand, Lawrence Yule, says the central government must do more to help councils prepare.
Effectively, we bury our heads in the sand. We are doing nothing to best position our communities for where we're going to end up in 100 years. And I don't think it is acceptable that local government just gets left to sort of, peddle this itself.
But the Climate Change Minister, Tim Grosser, says local problems need local solutions.
Conditions vary enormously around our country, and we think we should give people the tools to address this, the right information, but finally it is better left to the people in the community to decide what specifically they need to do rather than trying to impose a one-size-fits-all approach from the central government.
Well, the Adjunct Research Associate of Victoria University's Climate Change Research Institute, Judy Lawrence, agrees we're not well prepared for the effects of climate change, and she's with us now. Ms. Lawrence, how much is that because local government is overwhelmed by the size of the problems that are there in front of them?
Oh, good morning, Geoff. I think that, yes, they are overwhelmed because some things are better done at a national level, some things are better done at regional and others at the local level. And this is a all-hands-to-the-pump issue because we have to move from reacting to one-off disasters and plan for ongoing change that will become more frequent. And so this is something we haven't had to deal with before.
So does central government need to be coordinating what the individual local governments are doing?
I think central government needs to work closely with local government and coordinate some things it's best able to do, and not to direct it, but to work with it and to work with the communities that are affected.
Do you think we actually, deep down, accept that there is going to be significant change to the environment because of climate change?
Yes, I think we do. And in all the discussions we have with local communities and the local authorities, is that, yes, there is a problem. They know there's a problem, but it is very difficult. It's difficult when individuals are affected by these things in the short term, but these are long-term issues. So we need to rise above the short-term interests and look at ways in which we can stage our change over time and take into account the interests of people through time, not just this generation.
It's easy in one sense to say that, but when there's a hazard line going through your property where you've lived for the last 30 years and your parents did before you, it's a bit different, isn't it?
Well, Geoff, I once drew a hazard line through my place in the 70s when we had landslips around this part of Wellington, and this is the way to go. It is a hazard line in itself is not the issue. Is that the best way to actually identify the risk, or is it better for us to sit down and find out ways in which we can identify the hazard, look at who's vulnerable, what is at risk nationally, where are the most important things that we need to do? We make decisions today that will last a very long time, and we're not integrating climate change considerations into them. We have some interesting innovations occurring around New Zealand. Local government is starting to do stuff. They are working together and sharing information, and it's this sort of sharing that I think we need to use as a bit of a platform to draw central government in and to look at ways in which central government can contribute in a more collegial way, if you like, rather than just saying leave it to local government.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us with that. Judy Lawrence, Adjunct Research Associate of Victoria University's Climate Change Research Institute. As the fruitless search for the missing Malaysian plane continues, authorities in Kuala Lumpur have issued a new version of the last communication with the aircraft. The last words spoken are now said to have been "Good night, Malaysian 370," and not "All right, good night," as originally reported. The Transport Ministry says forensic investigations will determine whether the pilot or co-pilot spoke the words, which came at 1:19 a.m. Malaysian time on the morning of March the 8th. CNN's Paula Hancock was at the media conference when the change was announced and says the new version is more formal and more in keeping with the way a pilot might usually speak to air traffic control. But once again, it raises questions about Malaysia's handling of the case.
The more significant point is that the Ministry of Transport has had to come out with this transcript, and it seems as though it's another turnaround for Malaysian authorities. The fact that it took well over 3 weeks to come out with the exact transcript. This information this evening will just add to the criticism about the way in the direction this investigation is going.
And as the families of the passengers and crew continue their anguished wait, a judge in Chicago has dismissed early legal action taken against Malaysia Airlines. That's been welcomed by James Healy-Pratt, head of aviation law at Stewart's Law in London, who says the move was never going to succeed.
The prospect of success of lawsuits in America is very, very slim. And literally an hour ago, I saw the lawsuit there was lots of noise made in the media about, dismissed by the Chicago court as being improper. And the lawyers that brought it were warned very seriously by the judge if they tried this again that there would be sanctions. So that lawsuit, and it wasn't even a lawsuit, it was a discovery petition, has gone. And that's good, because that was an unnecessary distraction for the families. And any lawyer who was suggesting that families could go to the American courts and claim millions in compensation were frankly misleading the families, and they were raising their expectations, because that simply is not a realistic option for the families of MH370.
Does it matter if the plane is never found?
It doesn't matter if the plane is never found, because under international law, an international treaty called the Montreal Convention applies to the legal relationship between the passengers and their families and Malaysia Airlines. And what that international treaty does is it makes Malaysian Airlines liable to pay full compensatory damages. And so the only issue for the families on the compensation issue is the best jurisdiction for the family to bring the claim against Malaysian Airlines.
Are there similarities between this case and the Air France case? I think you were involved in that, weren't you?
Yes, in Air France 447, which was some 4.5 years ago, 228 people lost their lives over the South Atlantic, and we helped many families there. In the first week after the disappearance of MH370, it did feel, in my recollection, that it could have been a similar Air France type event, a disappearance of a large passenger jet at altitude with no real explanation. But of course, in MH370, we've heard all sorts of other theories of a far more sinister nature. But coming back to the international law perspective, the rights that the families have against the airline are pretty similar to those that they had in Air France 447. And again, in Air France 447, there was some litigation in America, and the judge in California in federal court decided it wasn't the right place, or let alone the right country. So those cases were dismissed, and the vast majority of cases settled outside the United States.
And in terms of any possible action against the manufacturer of the aircraft, that presumably is really dependent upon some wreckage being found.
Well, you're absolutely right there. Until the black boxes are located, recovered and analysed, we won't know what happened on board MH370. We might never know, for example, if the black boxes have been manually turned off, and that has happened in a notorious accident called Silkair 185, which was in Indonesia in 1997. But any action against any manufacturer would need some form of evidence. And of course, that's going to come from the black boxes.
That's James Healy-Pratt, head of aviation law at Stewart's Law in London.